Daniel, I'm unsure you'll ever hear this story, but I'm thinking about you today. This is an article from Audubon Society, Invasion of the Bird Snatchers. It's a sweaty June morning on the outskirts of Tampa, and droves of reptile enthusiasts stream into the air-conditioned expo center at the Florida State Fairgrounds. They are vying to get first crack at the animals of Repticon, a weekend-long extravaganza that's similar to a baseball card convention, except instead of mint-conditioned Mickey Mantles and Pete Roses, there are green anacondas and bearded dragons. One vendor's table is covered in flimsy plastic catering trays that are filled with ball pythons. Others are selling Asian water monitors, gargoyle geckos, and yellow rat snakes. A guy strolls by wearing a Snakes Lives Matter t-shirt. Another man who has a 3-foot-long lizard slung across his chest like a bandolier is at a nearby booth admiring a young boa constrictor that's twirling around his girlfriend's fingers. Price? $100. Sold. More than 100 Repticons can take place every year, from Phoenix to Oklahoma City to Baltimore, attracting an estimated 200,000 visitors. These shows represent but a tiny sliver of the live reptile trade, a loosely regulated industry that spans the globe and generates an estimated $1.2 billion in revenue annually, according to the United States Association of Reptile Keepers. In much of the continental United States, these cold-blooded creatures aren't likely to fare well outdoors, should they escape or be set free. But South Florida is different, and the best adapted haven't just survived, they've thrived. Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC, has identified 50 types of non-native lizards, turtles, crocodilians, and snakes within state limits, more than anywhere else in the world. For the birds of Florida, this blitz of exotic predators poses an existential scale threat. The Burmese pythons, which stalk wading birds in the Everglades, have become so menacing that the state has hosted derby-style competitions to catch them. Further north, Nile monitors, the largest lizard in Africa, has been terrorizing a population of burrowing owls in the city of Cape Coral. And on the outskirts of Florida City, near Everglades National Park, egg-eating Argentine tegus could soon raid the nesting grounds of one of the last remaining populations of the endangered Cape Sable seaside sparrow. Each of these reptiles found its way to Florida via the pet trade. While most people acknowledge that's a leaky pipe, few agree on how to plug it. Take Ed Polsma, who's wandering Repticon with Pugsy, a 5.5-foot-long black-throated monitor that's a close relative to the Komodo dragon. Pugsley is a stunning creature with claws as long as steak knives, camouflage, and a muscular tail. What does Pugsy eat? Meat, Polsma said. He would eat anything you put in his cage that's meat. Literally anything. No, Pugsy has never bitten Polsma. And yes, he considers the giant lizard to be part of his family. You don't need a permit to buy a Pugsley of your own, and that's how Postma thinks it should be. If you want to look at invasive animals in the wild, the very worst thing in the world is a domestic cat, he tells me. Go to the ASPCA or local pound and look at all the dogs and cats. But everybody wants to blame the reptile owners. It's a sentiment that almost everyone I meet at Repticon echoes, including Greg Graziani, who has starred on National Geographic's channels Python Hunters, and now runs a reptile breeding facility and serves as an amnesty point for FWC. If someone wants to get rid of a reptile he shouldn't have or can no longer control, Graziani can arrange a no-questions-asked drop-off. Of course, invasive reptiles are a problem, he says, but so are invasive plants, trees, and mammals. And as for the risks tegus, pythons, and monitors pose to the menagerie of birds that depend on Florida's lush landscapes, Graziani is empathetic but unconvinced. The bird people are worried, he says. I understand their concern, but I haven't seen the science. Truth is, scientists have never seen anything quite like this. Biological invasions aren't necessarily blitzkriegs. It doesn't matter if an overwhelmed pet owner releases a few lizards or if a hurricane damages a breeding facility and sets free hundreds of snakes, as has happened. Some of the invaders die off, scooped up by predators or unable to adjust to the new environments. Others find food, find a mate, and survive. It's in those early days of their arrival, before generations of the species are hatched, that there's a chance at eradication. But with each new egg that's fertilized and each animal that reaches sexual maturity, the monetary and ecological costs of the problem increase. Biologists call this the invasion curve. And in Florida today, there are reptiles at every point along it. Take the Nile monitor, which falls in the middle of the curve, the containment phase. Any hope of eradication faded long ago. But it may be possible to keep them secluded to a few small pockets of the state. That's the job of Bob Mongok, who, on the Monday morning after Repticon, is in a vacant lot in Cape Coral smacking a package of frozen chicken with the claw end of a hammer. He pries free a hunk of raw poultry and tosses it to the back of a spring-plated trap. For the Cape Coral Environmental Resource Division has caught and killed more monitors than he can remember. As their name implies, Nile monitors have no business in this hemisphere. They should be basking along the shores of Africa's Nile Delta, but they got popular in the pet trade, and the rumor has it that the owner of a now defunct pet store, scheming a source of free inventory, let loose behind his shop so they would breed in the wild. Unsurprisingly, the lizards quickly fanned out across Cape Coral's extensive canal system. In the early 2000s, they began regularly popping up in the people's backyard. If you're not accustomed to large lizards, the adult Nile monitor dashing across your lawn might be terrifying. They can top 7 feet, swim like Michael Phelps, and eat rodents, birds, rabbits, rattlesnakes, cane toads, and according to some residents, cats and dogs. There's no telling how many now monitors are in Cape Coral. Since 2000, the city has logged more than 2,500 sightings and trapped 564 of the animals. Estimates put their population at 1,000, a lowball number in Mongok's eyes. Today he'll bait 11 traps, all within view of nice homes with pools, screened-in porches, and garages. As we drive from site to site, we pass a handful of burrowing owls perched on wooden stakes like adorable stuffed animals. That the city is home to one of the world's largest population of burrowing owls is a point of pride among some residents, not to mention a good tourism draw. The owls are staring down a long list of threats, including significant habitat loss. The FWC declared them a state-threatened species in November 2016. It's known that now monitors eat burrowing owls. What's unknown is the number of owls they have devoured. One of the first confirmed cases dates to 2005 when a woman saw a monitor in her yard with one of the tiny, tawny owls stretched in its jaws. She grabbed a flower pot and threw it at the lizard. It dropped the owl and bolted away, but the bird did not survive. At least 2 other instances of monitors eating owls have been reported, and it seems certain that other attacks have gone undocumented. Owls aren't the only birds in monitors' crosshairs. The lizards hunt cooperatively and are known to team up to lure birds off their nests so they can pillage the eggs, according to the report by Todd Campbell, a biologist at the University of Tampa. Many of Florida's wading birds would be an easy target while foraging in mangroves and along tidal creeks and artificial canals, the 2008 report warns, and now monitors are excellent tree climbers, so the nests of the wading birds are also at risks. Back at Repticon, I saw several types of monitors for sale. It's a family that has roughly 70 species, and only 2, the Komodo dragon and the Nile monitor, are tightly regulated in Florida. FWC classifies the Nile monitor as a conditional species, along with just 7 other reptiles, including the Burmese python and the reticulated python. These species can't be sold as pets, but with the right permits, you can have them for commercial, research, or exhibition purposes. Dozens of other monitor species can be bought and sold, no problem. It's a situation that draws criticism from both sides. Those who would like to see more control over the reptile trade consider it a gaping regulatory hole that could allow new invasive species to flourish. Those in the pet trade see it as evidence of how arbitrary and inconsistent the rules are. Mongok isn't keen on discussing whether or how the pet trade should be controlled, other than saying the Nile monitors are not pets. He's been bitten, scratched, peed on, and pooped on enough times. He was chasing them, not the other way around, he says, to know that these animals never play nice. 2 days after we part ways, one of the traps we set nabs a 3-foot Nile monitor that was first spotted door. Like nearly all the monitor's Mongok traps, it was placed into a sealed plastic tube and exposed to a hefty dose of chloroform. Death by asphyxiation, a grisly fate, but what other options are there? Keep following the invasion curve upward, past the point of containment, past the Nile monitor all the way to the top, and you will find the Burmese python. They can grow more than 18 feet long and were for a time one of the most popular snakes in the pet trade. Now there are an estimated tens or hundreds of thousands of Burmese pythons in Florida, and they're eating everything. Rabbits, rats, bobcats, deer, even alligators. On the invasion curve, they fall to the resource protection and long-term management section. In other words, they are taking over, and our only hope is to safeguard what they have not yet destroyed. Pythons are definitely eating birds, says Brian Smith, a biologist who works for Cherokee Nation Technologies, a company contracted by the United States Survey to help the invasive Burmese python population. A few years ago, Smith went to capture a python in Everglades National Park. The snake was in a shallow marsh, and Smith noticed a bulge in its stomach. He moved in and grabbed the python near the base of its head. Suddenly, 2 bird feet popped out of the snake's mouth. A moment later, another 2 feet shot out. The snake writhed and in one fell swoop regurgitated a pair of full-grown great blue herons. Smith couldn't believe his eyes. Both birds' heads were missing. Other than that, the animals were intact and easy to identify. Smith's gruesome anecdote raises an important question. Could Burmese pythons devour resident birds of the Everglades the same way they did the small mammals? In 2012, researchers reported in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that marsh rabbits, raccoons, and opossums had all but vanished from the site of Everglades National Park. One of the culprits they suggested was the Burmese python, which records show was established in the park around 2000. If that's the case, it took the snakes just a decade their way through that section of the ecological menu. Knowing whether they have completely shifted their diet to wading birds for the next course is difficult to determine, though. I think that is possible, says Christina Ramagosa, a wildlife ecologist at the University of Florida, but I am having a hard time showing it because we really don't know what's out there for them to eat. Some evidence sits on Ramagosa's desk. Several plastic bags containing the remains of a roseate spoonbill. One is filled with bones, another has the bird's feet. The biggest bag holds soft pink feathers, some still in sheath. A few days earlier, the remains had been found in the gut of a Burmese python that had been run over by a motorist. It looks like maybe this bird was molting, Ramagosa speculates. As a graduate student, Ramagosa began amassing one of the largest running data sets of wildlife imports and exports, which she used to show that buying, selling, and transporting exotic animals around the world is one of the root causes of the invasive species epidemic. Her current work, however, involves analyzing a fair amount of snake poop. Teams at Everglades National Park and the Conservancy of Southwest Florida collect dead Burmese pythons, perform necropsies, and freeze whatever fecal matter happens to be inside. Then Ramagosa's technicians, Eric Suarez and Diego Juarez Sanchez, perform the odoriferous task of washing the waste in a sieve and analyzing the remains. It is anyone's guess as to what one heap of python poop might reveal. There can be tufts of mammal fur, fragments of bird feathers, crushed bones, disembodied beaks, and flecks of eggshell. When Ramagosa is stymied, she ships the parts to Carla Dove, head of the Smithsonian Institution's Feather Identification Laboratory. It drives me crazy, Dove tells me. These birds didn't evolve with this kind of predator. At least 39 different species have been found in python remains. They include the federally threatened wood stork, magnificent frigate bird, great blue heron, little blue heron, red-whiskered bulbul, snowy egret, and the pied-billed grebe. Rails and white ibis are common finds, and entire lumpkins and guinea fowl eggs have been removed from the bellies of these beasts. But Rama doesn't know if the snakes are developing a taste for birds, just that they're eating them. Maybe pythons are selecting certain prey, or maybe they're snacking on whatever is nearby. We get a lot of ibis in the diet, but maybe that's just because there's a lot of ibis out there, she says. Roseate spoonbill especially is setting off alarm bells. It's a really bad thing, says Jerry Lawrence, director of research at Audubon, Florida's Everglades Science Center. Spoonbills are a key indicator species are measuring the success of Everglades restoration efforts. Fewer nesting spoonbills could mean inadequate habitat or a voracious predator. From a statistical perspective, that is a variable that should be entered into any model, but if you can't quantify it, you can't control it, Lauren says. The question becomes, how many spoonbills are being eaten by pythons? And of course, that's an impossible question to answer. Nile monitors and Burmese pythons came, destroyed, and got regulated. They are cautionary tales, but legislatures have been slow to heed the warnings. Case in point, the Argentine tegu, a squat lizard with enormous jaws that isn't hard to find on the outskirts of Miami. To get a glimpse, I'm in the back seat of a Ford F-150, sitting next to a plastic container labeled "Dangerous Reptiles." At the wheel is Brittany Mason, and riding shotgun is Sarah Cook, both of whom are trapping tegus on behalf of the University of Florida's Croc Docs Lab. Tegus are omnivorous eating machines with a taste for eggs. In their native South America, they raid caiman nests and eat tinamou, a ground-dwelling bird. But as I'm learning today, they seem equally enticed by store-bought chicken eggs. An hour into the trip, Cook walks down a pile of rocks, holding the first tegu of the day, a juvenile that's 16 inches long, give or take. She shakes the lizard into a canvas bag, tags it with pink tape, and tosses it into the dangerous reptiles bin. With ruthless efficiency, the young women clear and rebait the entire line of 150 traps, hauling out 5 more tegus. Just like pythons and monitors, tegus got a toehold in South Florida through the pet trade, where they are beloved as docile, intelligent, and affectionate companions. Over the past decade, they've rocketed up the invasion curve, and the fight against them is now at an inflection point. We're out of the eradication part of the invasion curve. We're heading up through containment, says Frank Mazzotti, an ecologist who leads the Croc Docs Lab. The question is, are our efforts going to be enough? It's a loaded question with dramatic implications. The lizards have already raided alligator and turtle nests in Florida, and the traps we visited were miles from one of the last populations of the Cape Sable seaside sparrow, a federally endangered species that builds its nest next to 6 inches off the ground. Since 2014, Mazzotti's team has trapped 1,418 tegus. The good news is that the gut contents of a few hundred tegus that were necroseed didn't have any sparrows or sparrow eggs. The bad news is that there could be thousands of tegus out there, and they appear to be spreading throughout the state. There are additional populations on the Gulf Coast and farther north in Tampa and near Orlando. Making matters worse is that tegus slip into a hibernation-like state for the coldest months each year and are better equipped to handle cooler temperatures than the Burmese python. Yet for all the trouble they're causing and all the risks they pose, tegu sales aren't regulated in Florida. Unlike the Nile monitor or the Burmese python, FWC does not classify Argentine tegus as a conditional species. Head to Repticon, drive to a pet shop, or jump on Google and you can buy one for a few $100. It seems counterintuitive that federal and state resources are being allocated to trap and kill tegus while at the same time there is minimal oversight of the trade. I asked FWC if tegus should be listed as a conditional species and what steps the agency is taking, if any, to limit trade. In response, an agency spokesperson wrote that they are considering many approaches to minimizing the impact these species may have in Florida, and that the agency is putting resources towards assessing the risks of non-native species and making any further changes if warranted. I posed the same question to Phil Goss, president of the U.S. Association of Reptile Keepers, a trade organization that advocates on behalf of reptile owners and breeders. FWC has been talking about doing something for 4 or 5 years and nothing has come to fruition. There's so much red tape. For Mazzotti, there is no question that the tegu trade should be more tightly regulated, and the fact that it's not is indicative as a much bigger problem. When it comes to exotic species, whether it's a fish, a snake, or a plant, the United States has a wait-and-see mentality before doing anything. Once you can see the impact that a species is having, Mazzotti says, it's too late. Scientists, state regulators, and land managers are already stretched thin in the battle against invasive reptiles and the challenges are only growing. A recent federal court ruling rolled back enforcement of the Lacey Act, which for nearly 3 decades has largely prevented the importation of brown tree snakes, yellow anacondas, and other injurious wildlife species. Now anyone can transport them across state lines, leaving FWC scrambling to find a stopgap while simultaneously dealing with the dozens of destructive reptile species already in play. In the absence of regulatory fix, scientists have turned to more creative solutions for fighting reptiles in the wild. Ramagosa has worked with dogs trained to sniff out pythons, and others are analyzing water samples for environmental DNA or eDNA, genetic material that may indicate the presence of pythons in bird rookeries. All of these undertakings are aimed at bolstering nearly detection and rapid response, which Mazzotti says is key to staying a step ahead. To the end, one of the most helpful tactics could be as simple as birders reporting invasive species they come across while in the field. Florida has set up a toll-free hotline to call in sightings. 1-888-I've-GOT-1. And the University of Georgia Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health has developed smartphone apps that enable users to report them. Before leaving Florida, I stop at Audubon's Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, where I'm greeted by a symphony of woodpeckers and amphibians. It's a welcome respite, a swampy enclave seemingly free of invasive pythons, monitors, and tegus, at least for now. We see them as a serious threat, says Sean Clem, research manager for the Audubon, Florida Western Everglades Research Center, located in Corkscrew. Rather than wait for the worst and then act, Clem and her team are busy sharpening their frontline defenses. Recently, they've increased their efforts to survey mammal populations. A drop in those numbers could indicate that pythons are near. She also formed a rapid response team with Mazzotti's lab, and most of Corkscrew's backcountry staff are now trained to safely capture and remove pythons. Clam knows that Corkscrew will not remain impervious to these invasive species forever. In recent years, a handful of live tegus and dead pythons have been found along the nearby roads just a few miles outside the sanctuary. She is worried about what these exotic predators might mean for wood storks, wild turkeys, northern bobwhites, and all the other species of birds that call Corkscrew home. We're being vigilant, she says. We're ready. Love you, Daniel.